episode 111 of Strange Brow Radio. I'm your host, Tove Johnson. And this is a special Patreon edition of Strange Brow Radio. For episode 111, we have werewolves coming knocking at the door. I told you that we were going to talk about lichens and such canine creatures. Well, this is a very unique, interesting guest, and I think it's part one of a two-part series. I'll tell you more at the end of this episode of what I have in store with this guest here. Thank you to our sponsors, Feral by Aaron over at Etsy, ETSY, Feral by Aaron, ERYN, Alchemy Sound Tools, mention Strange Brow Radio, and get something special in the box. Okay, we'll be right back. So the Strange Stroll poll closed on Easter Sunday, and I have been strangely silent talking about that, but let's talk about it. So what was chosen? Well, via over at Patreon, via YouTube and Facebook, it looks like Northern State Asylum, I Shall Go. Forks we'll have to put on the back burner, and I'll get out there and shoot that as soon as I can, and then get that up for you, and we'll move on to what is it, Strange Stroll number 5 or 6 or something like that. So that's going to be a scary one for me for all sorts of reasons, and I'll explain more in that video. Also coming up May 1st and 2nd is our next virtual conference. It's going to be a small, intimate conference, but a globally reaching conference. We are going to be talking about power spots and forgotten cultures with Ira Wolfnosen. She has definitely lived in a power spot. I think she does now. And Ira Wolfnosen will be first up on May 1st, starting at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time over at the Strange Brow Radio Facebook page, also on YouTube. And there is a Zoom link over at the Strange Brow Radio events tab with the full list. And after Ira, Marcia K. Moore will be speaking about forgotten cultures and repatriation and understanding maybe the link between megalithic mound builders, structures, the elongated skull people, and who they may have been and what they certainly may have looked like. And as I said, Sasquatch. And then Jill Remensnyder will be coming up last on the list on May 1st, 2021. And she's going to be talking about, since she's the brainchild of Flash of Beauty, the documentary. So 3 great guests on May 1st. Then we're headed out to a power spot to do power spot things and record the whole thing. And just like the last conference, which you can still catch over at Strange Brow Radio's Facebook page and also on YouTube, we're going out to do a field exercise in a suggested power spot in the Pacific Northwest. Rolling with some night vision, bringing our gizmos, and maybe even a dog that can smell out the supernatural. And then we're coming back on May 2nd. That is Sunday, May 2nd, and we will be doing a full review of what our night was like. So May 1st and 2nd over at Strange Brow Radio's Facebook page. There you'll find out more about that. Okay. As promised, today, Lisa Lycan, part 1 with Lisa Lycan and her very detailed journey with the dog woman, dog lady, dog girl, dog chick. It's a powerful story. She has amazing details, and it's a very interesting encounter and description of something that sounds very real, oddly enough. And so this part 1 of a part 2 may end up actually being a part 3, and that's, excuse me, bumped the mic. That will be coming up hopefully as a rendering or 3D impression of what she's describing via our new sponsors over at metallicmonsters.com. And maybe we can get her to describe and actually print up in a 3D rendering of what she saw. So pay close attention. Very interesting story. Part 1 with Lisa Lycan and the Dog Woman. With me now is Lisa Lycan. And Lisa, your story really begins and ends in an interesting territory for us. I only know what you've told me so far regarding your experiences with what we're calling DogMan, which is, let's face it, a really bad name for what people are describing, including yourself. So I know that you have a world of experiences with this, given the name that you go by, because that's your pseudonym. So give us a little bit of history on yourself and just take us back to this interesting, strange road that you've been on with the DogMan, and we'll go from there.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, as you introduced me, I am known as Lisa Lycan. Lycan was actually given to me by mistake by someone that was in my group, and it's kind of stuck with me. But I first was on Vic Cundiff's show, Dogman Encounters. It was episode 74, I believe, almost 6 years ago. It was a while ago. And I had some very disturbing experiences in early childhood, but also later on in life that I didn't talk about because I really wasn't sure what I had dealt with. And I personally became fascinated with Bigfoot back in 2002 and was researching everything that I could about that subject, and had some memories pertaining to that. So I've definitely had some Sasquatch experiences as well. But I happened to be listening to YouTube one day and cleaning my house, and the news feed or this as they came up. One was for Vic's show, and I kind of thought it was a joke at first. And then I started to listen to a couple of episodes, and I began to realize that what I had seen, not everything that I had seen had been a Sasquatch. So I actually reached out to Vic, and he's a great guy. I can't emphasize that enough. He actually spent about 7 hours on the phone with me, reassuring me that what I had seen, I hadn't imagined, and had told me some things in confidence about some of the people that he had dealt with and some of the things that they had seen, and then convinced me to come on his show. At that time, I was married to someone who had a profession that he was kind of well known in some circles, and I didn't want to expose him by revealing who I was. And I also have children. At that time, everybody was at home, so I went with Lisa. And then I did a few more shows with Vic to include his inaugural episode of Bigfoot Eyewitness Radio. I've also been on the Confessionals, Feminist Fringe, Ninja of the Woods, Paranormal Roundtable. I've done a few things in that aspect. I do field research. I haven't in the past few years, just because of all the craziness that's been going on with COVID and just some things going on in my personal life. But I am a field researcher. I have gone out with a couple other people that are in this field and have had some pretty wild experiences out there, and have done what I could have taken a few cases, some of them internationally, in trying to help people that are having ongoing encounters with dogmen. Some of them that are really scary, but we've been able to make some suggestions that have helped in their incidences, or at least be able to help them make sense of what it is that they're experiencing. Of course, the biggest question that we all wonder is why, what are they, why are they around, and why do they seem to harass some people? So I think that's probably enough for.
Well, yeah, tell people exactly what you've seen.
Okay, well, most people that have heard my story before know that I had some really strange experiences when I was 5 or 6. I'm originally from Bennington, Vermont, and Bennington itself is just a really strange place. It is known for having a phenomenon called the Bennington Triangle. That phrase was keyed by an author that wrote about the area. Lots of paranormal stuff, lots of UFOs, something that they called the Bennington Monster that I remember from childhood. A lot of people in the schoolyard talking about that. And I mean, Bennington is not a big town. It's 16,000 people. It hasn't changed in the past 40 years whatsoever. And I started having these experiences in my backyard. This was pretty much a suburban neighborhood, and the surrounding landscape, there were mountains, there were caves, there were lots and lots of fields, lots of woods. But right behind my house, in between the neighborhoods, was this one property that had at least a couple acres of land, and some of it was wooded. And back in the 70s and 80s, our parents used to let us wander around. Well, I took to wandering pretty early. I ended up finding a playhouse in these woods, on a path that led from my backyard to somebody else's yard. And I would go in there from time to time. It was stocked full of toys, and I would play. But sometimes I would have this feeling come over me like I was in danger or like I was being watched. And so I would leave. Most of the time I'd be running. And I would feel scared and I wouldn't know why. And there was one time I brought my older sister out there with me, and the same thing happened to her, interestingly enough. We were sitting in the playhouse, and all of a sudden she had that feeling come over her that something wasn't right. And I remember her very distinctly telling me, we need to go. And she tried to warn me not to go back there again. And of course, I didn't listen to her. And then finally one day I was in the playhouse having a good time getting into things, and the people that owned the house to this property came home. And I remember thinking that I was trapped and just trying to stay still. But from my vantage point inside the playhouse, I could look out, see their backyard, and I saw this woman come to her sliding glass door and open it up, and she had the screen, closed. And I watched her put on some music, and she sat down and grabbed a classical guitar and she started playing music. So guessing it was one of those scenarios where it was a learn how to play guitar, and it was a record that was teaching her. But as she started to play, I began to hear and at the same time feel what I can only describe as a vibration. And it sounded a lot like a drone of bees. And there were different octaves around me. And I just kind of sat there trapped watching this lady. And this lady was just kind of scanning the woods as she played. And next to the entrance of this playhouse, no, it was like a wood house that somebody built. So there were cutout windows and a cutout door. But next to where the door was, there was a birch tree with a Y in it. And I remember having that feeling of fear come over me again that I had gotten familiar with. And I looked between the Y of a tree, and there was a black eye watching me. And I ran out of the playhouse and went back.
Okay. And at that point, what happened? Allison? Can you hear me?
There are things about these encounters that I had with this one individual that I possibly have blocked out, either due to it was an early age or due to the experience being traumatic. But there are bits and pieces of encounters that I remember. So if it sounds a bit choppy, that's the reason why. But the next thing I remember was pretty sure it was either spring or summer, only because the leaves hadn't changed color yet. Warm afternoon, I left, my house, was walking through the backyard and with the intention of going to the playhouse when something stepped into the path and cut me off. So what I remember from that was looking up into the face of this creature, and it reminded me of, for lack of a better term, it reminded me of the monsters on the Muppets, like the large ones where you could tell it was a person in a suit. It had blonde hair. It had a nose that was like a dog's, but it was kind of pushed in, and that was black. The eyes were dark brown. It had ears that were almost more lynx-like because it was on the side of its ears. And this thing was covered in fur, and it was like a blondish color. And at the time, I didn't feel afraid. I think in my mind as a 5 or 6 year old was, okay, this is a monster. I've seen these on TV. So I'm looking up at this thing and it's looking down at me, but it has its shoulder is pointed at me, and it's just kind of looking down its nose at me. And then it starts to turn its shoulders to look at something behind it. And there was a second creature in my parents' garden. And this thing was so tall that this head was in the boughs of a maple tree. And I remember the green leaves being around it, but I do remember a pair of black eyes blinking. And then it just kind of turned its back and it started to rip up the plants in my parents' garden. And I remember saying to it, I'm going to tell my father on you. And I turned around and ran into my house. And this was a kitchen door that led to the backyard. And I shut the door. And when I shut the door, the first creature was on the stoop and it was looking in the window at me. And that's when the fear kicked in. And so I remember shutting the storm door and running into the living room and telling my parents that there were monsters in the garden. And so my dad, being, the guy that he was, I don't know if I can swear, so edit this out, but he said bullshit. That was his response.
Go right ahead.
Okay, so his response was bullshit, and my mother just kind of made a face and went out from the living room, went into the kitchen, and I remember running behind her because I was scared something bad would happen to her. And she looked out into the backyard, and she looked at me and she said, no, there's no monsters. And I remember looking out there and there was nothing, and having that sinking, feeling of, did I imagine it? Is there something wrong with me? Because I was sure that this had happened. So it was either that day or the next day. I remember being in the house, and this wasn't a very big house. It was, it was like a 2-bedroom ranch house. I remember being in the house and I heard my mother calling for me. And hold on a second, one of my daughters is trying to come in. Not right
go
now.
ahead.
You need, they're all wet, honey. Okay. Sorry.
That's all right. There's a little bit of a feedback issue here too. I'm trying to figure out if it's on my end or your end here. I don't know if there's a cell phone near the phone at all, Lisa. Sometimes that does it if you have a phone too close, but maybe, do you hear a slight hiss sound at all? Yeah, somewhat. Okay, so go ahead from where you left off.
I had a phone sitting next to it. I just tossed it. I don't hear it hissing anymore.
Yeah, you go right ahead and I'll fix it in post.
Okay. So my mother called for me from the garden. I was in the house playing, and I went outside, and her and my dad were in the garden, and the garden was completely destroyed except for the tomatoes, which was interesting. And my mom said, tell me what you saw again. And so I told her again, that I was outside and there were monsters in the backyard, and one of them was tearing up the garden. And my father, of course, refused to believe that. And I do remember my mother said, how do you explain these footprints? And so there were large footprints in the dirt. And of course, I didn't really examine them. I just acknowledged that they'd been there. And my father was a high school band director. So he told my mom, he said, well, some of these kids know that, all he said was that I'm into some of this stuff, which I'm really not sure what that meant exactly. But he said, some of the kids know I'm into some of this stuff. So maybe they came up here and played a joke. And again, my mother pointed out the footprints, and they weren't sure what happened. They weren't sure if it was me, if I, tore up the garden and then went in and lied about it and said it was monsters, but they made me stay out for that afternoon and help them clean up. But again, like I said, everything was ripped up, stomped on. I think a lot of it was taken except tomatoes, which I thought was interesting.
Right. Well, stop there for a second regarding the tomatoes. Do you have any opinion on what that is? You said interesting, but what do you think that's about?
Well, I do think what I think is interesting is tomatoes are part of the nightshade family. So I don't know if that would be toxic to certain types of animals. I don't know if they would instinctually know, I mean, of course, you wouldn't know one of these things unless you could sit down with one of these guys and ask them questions. So I don't know if if it's a thing where they just realize those are bad for them to eat. There were some other strange things that were going on around the house. There were things like sometimes we would hear, my sister and I had the upstairs bedroom, and sometimes we would hear things walking around at night. Sometimes I would wake up and there would be eyes in the window staring at me. And I remember usually it would be one pair of red eyes. Sometimes it was several eyes. And the way that the upstairs was set up, you'd walk upstairs and there was kind of like this long hallway and sort of like a section that was a loft and then a bedroom. So my sister had the actual bedroom part and I was in the loft part. And there were times when I would wake up and I would see these eyes and I would try to go back to sleep, and other times I would feel afraid. So I remember very distinctly one morning my father coming upstairs and I wasn't in bed and he couldn't find me, and he found me sleeping between the bed and the wall. And when he woke me up, he asked me why I was sleeping, down there, and I said it was because of the eyes. And he asked me to describe them, and I did. And he said, well, maybe it was an owl. That was either his suggestion or, in his mind trying to come up with a logical explanation. But I remember because I was young, I wasn't sure what an owl was. So he explained to me what an owl was. And because of that, I just started to call the eyes the owl every time I saw it, or if anybody else talked about seeing that. And there was one night when I was in my sister's room with her and we looked out the window facing the backyard, and there were several of these eyes sitting in that tree that I described where I had seen the second creature. And one set of eyes was just staring at us. And I told her that Dad said those are owls. So I remember we sat there for a few minutes watching them, and then we finally got the creeps and, shut the curtain and went to sleep. We also had a guest for dinner, and I'm not sure who this kid was. He was either a student of my father's or somebody that they knew from the local college, because they did things up there. My parents both were musicians, and so they did things affiliated with the college. But he said that he saw something disturbing outside, and I asked him if it was an owl. So that kind of became my thing. I didn't make a connection between the monsters I'd seen in the backyard and the eyes. Just the eyes to me were the owls. And the next incident that I remember clearly, my parents had a friend come over with a little girl who was about my age, and she was extremely shy. And my sister and I took her upstairs to play, and she kept crying, and we'd have to bring her back downstairs to her dad, and he'd have to soothe her and then try to encourage her to go upstairs and play with us, but she really didn't want to have anything to do with us. So I said to her, hey, do you want to see a secret? And I took her to the playhouse. So we ended up in the playhouse. We were having a good time. She wasn't crying. And all of a sudden I saw one creature walk by, which I'm assuming is the same one that I saw in the garden, and it was covered in auburn hair. But it was tall. It was so tall that I could not see the head, so I couldn't identify, what it was. This one walked by and walked off into the forest, and then the blonde creature that I described came and looked in the window, looked at the little girl that I was with, and made direct eye contact with me. And when that happened, I dove underneath this little table that was there, and this poor little girl cowered in the corner, and she started to scream hysterically, and I started to cry. And then this creature came and wedged its body in the door and had its arms resting on top of the roof and was peering in at both of us. And I got a very good look at it. and I've described this to a lot of researchers, but her eyes were black. And I don't know if it was from pupil dilation, but they looked black, and she showed her teeth and all of them were sharp and jagged looking to me. That's the only way I can describe it. But she was making vocalizations that sounded more like growling. And it was really hard to tell if it was aggression or just some sort of enjoyment of scaring us. I'm really not sure. But I did see long legs that looked straight, still covered in hair. The tops of her feet, which almost looked dome shaped. And I remember the little girl started to scream louder because she said that she peed herself, which made me more hysterical. And I was so close to her foot, to the creature's foot, and I'll tell you why I call her in a little bit. I ended up pounding on the top of her foot and telling her to move. She quit growling. She kind of had this look on her face, like almost like she was offended, and she moved off. And this girl and I ran out of there, ran down the path. And her father was out in the backyard calling for her. And as soon as she saw him, she ran to him and just was, absolutely sobbing. And he asked me what happened. And I said, she got scared and she had an accident. And he ended up taking her home. And I had this feeling that, and I can't explain some of my thinking, but I had this feeling come over to me that probably hitting her, the monster, was a bad idea. And I probably should go apologize before something bad happens. So this was my thinking. But again, it was a child. So maybe child logic. I don't really know. But I ended up going back into the woods, and I just started talking and saying, I'm sorry that I hit you, but you scared my friend. And somehow she was there. I didn't even hear her. I didn't see her come from anywhere. She was just there. And I sat down on the ground, Indian style, and she mimicked me. And we just kind of sat there, and she was looking me over really, really good. Eyes were just real shifty, very big, what I would call nocturnal eyes, kind of shifty, just kind of looking me over. And then she patted me on the head. And I remember feeling this strength, and it looked like a mitt. So, because I've had people ask me to describe this, all I could see was hair. Didn't see any fingers. I just saw when she reached out, that it looked mitt-like, patted me on the head. And I remember it felt like I could feel it in my neck, and my teeth clicked from the force of it. And then the next thing I knew, she grabbed me, and I think I blacked out, and I was on the ground next to this creature. So when I came to from that, I realized that she had me pinned to her side, and she was laying on her back. And I had this overwhelming fear just rise up in me. And I really feel like something divine kind of intervened. But in my mind entered a voice that said, whatever you do, just stay still and don't panic. And so I laid there with her, and she was shuffling her feet in leaf litter, and she was kind of chattering. I don't really know if it was a language. This was something that I've had asked of me before, but she definitely was making some vocalizations like she was trying to have a conversation with me. And I was having thoughts like, I'm never going to see my mother again. Nobody's going to know what happened to me. And really fighting the urge not to have an all-out panic. And finally, the right side of my body became numb and was starting to hurt. Like I was having various tingling sensations. And so I very slowly started to shift my position, and I started to talk to her like I would our pet dog back home. And I said, it's okay. And she looked me, directly into my eyes, and I looked at her, and then I put my hand on her chest, and that's when I noticed what looked like underdeveloped breasts, which is why I call her. So there was the rise of them underneath what I think was definitely fur, and the texture of which was wiry. It was definitely oily. And once I got comfortable, she just kind of turned her head away and just started this chatter again. And within a few seconds, she dropped her hold of me and she flipped over and she was on all fours and she started to growl. And this growl emanated from her chest. Her eyes went black. They were extremely wide. And then I heard my sister calling my name. And I remember saying to her very clearly, "Hey, that's my sister." And the growling stopped and she stalked off on all fours. And then I ran to my sister. And as soon as I found her, I grabbed her hand and I said, "You got to come see my friend now." And she was like, "Never mind all that. Dad's really pissed off. You need to come home." And then she was like, "You're a mess." And she noticed that I, had leaf litter in my hair. And she told me that I stunk and I couldn't smell anything. But she was like, "What have you been doing? Because you smell horrible." And I didn't know, I didn't even notice it at the time. But when I went back home, my dad sat me down and he said that his friend called and he had to take his little girl to the emergency room because she was in hysterics, and that this girl told her father everything that happened. So my dad asked me, he asked me what happened. And I was, back then, especially when I was little, I was really afraid of my father, and I was afraid of him being angry at me. And so I told him the same thing that I had said before. I said she got scared, meaning the little girl. She got scared and she wet herself.
All right, there's your cliffhanger. Next week, part 2 with Lisa Lycan. Find out more. Probably a part 3 coming up. Well, I'm going to say hopefully a week after that. Not quite sure yet, but that's where Metallic Monsters is coming in. And the quick and the short is we're going to do some 3D model renderings of what Lisa's describing. And we're just going to start with her and see where it goes from there. One thing I want to do is get out to the factory and see how they make this stuff. I mean, go to metallicmonsters.com and you can see exactly what I'm talking about. It's all 3D renderings from graphic design artists that work with something called a ZBrush, I think. And it's a little bit what Marcia does too with her repatriation work. Really interesting process. They use more than plastics. They use rare earth materials, as well as silver and gold and all sorts of stuff here to make these really incredible statues with 3D printers. So that's what's coming up. If you'd like to be a guest or just want to shoot me an email, you can do that at strangebrowradio@gmail.com, or hop over at Facebook and friend me, Tobe Johnson. And it's all good. Don't forget, coming up May 1st and 2nd, our Forgotten Cultures and Power spot. You can go to Strange Brow Radio over the Facebook page there and go to the events tab, see the full schedule. And there we'll also be making some room on our Zoom channel for people that want to go over and actually log in and talk to some of the speakers on May 1st. Coming up. If you want to help out the show, check out the merch. You can do that over at strangebrowradio.com, and there is the merch tab. Got all sorts of cool stuff, t-shirts, hoodies, all that stuff helps support the show. A special shout out to Timothy Renner and his family. Get better soon, and we will see you back in the pod world. We look forward to many more flannel nightmares with strange familiars. That's it for me, and I will see you in the trees. Episode 111, Part 2, and my interview with Lisa Lycan and the story of the she-wolf, better known as Blondie. I'll remind you where we left off with her in a second, but thank you to our new sponsors at metallicmonsters.com. Custom bronze and aluminum minis by amazing fantasy and sci-fi artists from around the world. Explore unique tabletop gaming creations from the best artists from around the world. Take your game to the next level as you summon metallic monsters. Check them out. And I'll tell you more about those guys at the end of this particular episode and what we've managed to do with Blondie. Okay, we'll be right back. Coming up May 1st and 2nd, only on Strange Brow Radio, we'll be talking power spots and forgotten cultures with guest Ira Wolfnesen, who lived in a power spot, Marcia K. Moore, what I would call a repatriation artist, bringing back forgotten cultures, including the Longheads and Sasquatch. We'll be talking to her, and as well as director, producer, and brains behind the new documentary Flash of Beauty, Jill Remensnyder, and director Brett Eichenberger, as well as Mike Ferry, the cinematographer. So join us, won't you? That's going to be the mainstay on May 1st, 2021, starting at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Now, if you want to join in and be a part of the fun, watch the stream, you can do that. And the best way to probably do that is go to the Strange Brow Radio Facebook page under the events tab, or you can go to strangebrowradio.com, and there will be links there on the opening page as well. So if you want to be a part of that, go check that out. Okay, as far as today's episode, this is part 2 to our conversation with Lisa Lycan. I'll rewind the tape here to the part where Lisa was describing her excuse for why the little girl wet her pants. So let's continue where we left off with our guest Lisa Lycan and the story of Blondie.
I was, back then, especially when I was little, I was really afraid of my father, and I was afraid of him being angry at me. And so I told him the same thing that I had said before. I said she got scared, I mean, the little girl. She got scared and she wet herself. And so my dad just kind of sat there for a few minutes and he said, okay. He said, I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to tell you. Sorry, I got another daughter coming in.
Oh, that's okay. No, do what you need to do. Do you need to pause for a minute?
No, she's fine. She's just, there's 4 of us in a 2-bedroom apartment.
Oh, well, I've been there before.
Fortunately, where I'm at is one of the bathrooms in the laundry room, and so
let me ask you a question. We'll take a quick little question break here regarding the things that you've described so far. Just absolutely incredible encounter here. At any point, were you feeling there was some kind of mind speak going on between you and her?
I don't know. And the reason why I say that is because the voice that did enter my mind that said, whatever you do, don't panic and stay still, was male. And it sounded like an adult. So I don't know if there was an adult male around. I mean, I felt a strange sense of calm as soon as I heard this voice, and it sounded just like otherworldly. That's really the only way I can describe it. With her, there is something that I'm going to share with you that almost seemed like mind speak, but it was more of a sharing of emotions. I don't know if you have any other questions, but if you don't, I can finish.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so my dad absolutely forbid me to go into the woods. And he said pretty much just, he's like, don't even play in the backyard. I just want you on the front stoop where people can see you. And I said that was fine. And I remember pretty much when it was all said and done, my mom giving me a bath and trying to get the smell out. And by that time I could smell it. I don't know if it had to do with the adrenaline wearing off, but I finally could smell myself, and I can really only describe it as it's kind of smelled like rotting garbage. And I know that is a smell that has been associated with cryptids before, but that's really the only way I can describe it. And she gave me a bath and then she left me alone. And I remember crying in the bathtub because I was very confused about what had just happened and really didn't have a way of processing it, I think, at 5 or 6. So after that happened, there was, and there's 2 more incidences, and I'm just not sure which one happened first, but the one that I remember next was my sister spent the night at a friend's house, and I don't remember where I was, but I do remember I was either upstairs or in the kitchen, and there was all this commotion on our roof. There was a bunch of stomping and what sounded like voices and growling and things hitting the house. And it was about sunset when this happened. And I remember going into the living room, and my parents were just standing there in the middle of the living room, just staring up at the ceiling. And they had adopted this dog when I was a baby, who had been feral, and she was a border collie, and she was a pretty tough dog. But this dog was laying in the middle of the floor shaking, just absolutely shaking. And by the time that I came into the living room, my dad was watching the ceiling, and he said to my mom, okay, you grab Lisa. I'm going to grab the dog, and we're going to make a run for it into the bedroom. And so that's what happened. He scooped up the dog. My mom grabbed me, and we went into their bedroom. My dad put the dog next to me in bed, and my mom got in with us, and he grabbed his .22 because that was the only thing he had. He had a .22 rifle, and he loaded it and put that next to the door. And he got into bed next to me, and I remember curling up with my dog and falling asleep. And the next morning, we were waking up, but he went and searched the house, went outside, and then came back in and told us everything was fine. And we ended up getting up, but we didn't know what it was. I mean, I think I know what it was now, but of course had no idea what it was. And sometime after that, I was in the front yard playing on the stoop, and this was in the middle of the day. And this, and even talking about some of these things is what makes these things so mysterious and just so strange. But it was the middle of the day, so it couldn't have been any later than 12 o'clock. And I was sitting there, and I had this feeling, I had that old feeling of being watched come over me. And I looked to my left, and peering around the corner of my house was half of this creature's face kind of looking at me. And this is when those feelings, at least of mind speak, came in. So I stood up, and I didn't look at her, but I said, I'm very sorry, but I can't play with you anymore. And when I said that, I had these very strong and deep feelings of sadness come over me. And they were really, really intense. And they didn't feel like my feelings. Like I felt, at that point, I felt afraid. And I think I felt kind of annoyed in a way, because I didn't know what was happening. And I really I didn't want to upset my dad. I didn't know what was happening, and I really just kind of wanted this thing to leave me alone. So those feelings didn't feel like mine, and they were very, very strong. And I remember going into my house, and as far as I know, I never saw her again. But I did have some other things happen, or at least another thing that happened that I thought was a dream. But apparently, when I was a kid, I was a sleepwalker, and I would wake up in other parts of my house. And there were a few times that I woke up outside. And one time in the afternoon, I woke up the street, and one of my neighbors had to bring me back to my mom's. Whatever this experience was, I woke up in the woods behind my house, and it was nighttime. And I refer to this creature as Blondie. I've talked about her on other podcasts as Blondie, just to differentiate her and give her a name, based on what she looked like. But in this experience, or this dream, whatever it was, full moon in the forest, and she was there, and she took notice of me, and kind of had this look on her face like, oh. And I actually heard oh. And I don't know what that was, but it was a female voice, and came from her and said, oh, like, you're here. And then all of a sudden next to me was a very large creature that all I could see was like its torso. Couldn't see anything up, but I was face to face with its torso. And a very beautiful feminine voice said to me, what are you doing here? And I think I told it I didn't know. And then it asked me where I lived. And I pointed back in the direction of my house. And the only other thing that I remember was standing on the edge of the wood line next to Blondie. And there were at least two other of these large creatures with us. And then the female voice said, there's your house. You need to go in. And then I remember waking up outside, standing on my stoop, and I wasn't sure how I got there. So those were the most intense, really, really intense experiences I've had with cryptids, were those. And I'm still to this day not sure what she is. I was told that she was probably a type 3 DogMan, but I've also been told that she could have been a Gugway, especially because of the part of the country that this happened in. But those were the most intense experiences that I had.
And when was the last time you've seen Blondie or any of them?
Well, I mean, the last time I had a sighting, I'm trying to think. I was with another researcher, and it was here in Tennessee. That was back in, I think it was November of 18. He came here. We met online. He's researched in other parts of the country. He came to where I've had a lot of experiences in this area, or at least within a 30 mile radius of where I live, including my children. They've also seen things. And so we went to a park that is north of Nashville in a small town. It's the Whites Creek, Jolton area. I've mentioned this before. And we ended up going into this park at about 11 o'clock at night. And he wanted to do some call blasting to see what would happen. And he had a Bluetooth speaker. He played a certain recording, and we got all kinds of activity. We had things, we were surrounded by things, honestly. And in front of the car, about 25 feet from us, were two creatures, upright canine creatures. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Long snout, long ears. One of them was commando crawling across the road, and another one was standing in the trees, and it also seemed kind of distressed that we were there. And we were listening to, I don't know exactly what they're called. They're the little amplifiers that you can buy where it'll amplify sound back to you. And we were listening through his earbuds, and we heard something downhill that was talking, and I thought it was a Sasquatch, but this thing was verbalizing. And the researcher I was with told me that he was pretty sure that it was not a Sasquatch, that it was a DogMan. And this thing, I think, honed in on where we were, and it started to move up the hill through the trees at us like a freight train. And that was when I got scared. And especially because we had these two in front of us, and I got scared, and I didn't really say anything. I just kind of put my earbud down, and he looked at me and he's like, "Do you want to go?" And I said, "Yeah, let's leave," because I didn't know what we were going to get into.
Sure.
That was the last time that I've had a sighting.
And so much of what you described has this phasing in and phasing out quality to it, where it's physical and it's real, but it also has these moments here of where there's an absence of time and motion. What do you equate that to?
I don't know. I could speculate, but I try really hard not to speculate. When it comes to this whole phenomenon, there is so much to it, and there's so many theories, and there's a lot of similarities, which I think is great, but I think the similarities are probably all that we have. I don't know what we're dealing with. I don't know if we are dealing with something that is natural to this planet. I don't know if it comes from somewhere else. I don't know if it's about the whole intradimensional thing. I've heard those theories before. I just know that when I was having the memories of Blondie, for a long time, those memories would come up, and I would do my best to block them out and convince myself that those were dreams, that it didn't happen. But as I did more and more research just on the subject of Bigfoot, more or less, and I began to listen to some podcasts, and I would be in a few chat rooms, because this was like early, thousands, and talk to other people, I began to realize, okay, what I experienced, I don't think I imagined that. So that was the first stage for me. And then I kind of doubted my own sanity for a little bit. But like I said, the more that I began to talk to people, especially in this community, the more I've been able to compare notes with people. And I do think, I'll talk about Sasquatch like first for a minute. There seems to be something completely different about Sasquatch. With that whole thing, we seem to be dealing with an intelligence that is at least as, I think, in my opinion, is as good as ours. And they're extremely mysterious, and they're these huge beings that elude people. And I don't know, there's something to that, definitely, that is different and strange. With Blondie, the only thing I can tell you is when I went back out to apologize and I was talking, I don't know where she came from. Like I said, it was like she was there 1 minute, and I think I may have turned my head just kind of looking around, and then when I looked back, she was there, but it wasn't even a second. She was there 1 minute, but before, I don't know where she came from. So that definitely confuses me. With DogMan, and I'm talking about the upright canine creatures. A lot of that has just been strange. A lot of my own experiences with the upright canines have been in the state of Tennessee. I did have an experience once in Vermont with them, and my children have also had experiences with them here in Tennessee, and my oldest two possibly in California. I'm prior military, my ex is prior military, we've moved around quite a bit, which also made all this really weird to me too, and it didn't make sense to me because I wondered why, because it wasn't like I just experienced it in one place, I experienced it in several places, which also really had me questioning why. So with DogMan, they almost seem to be more earthbound, in my opinion. I've heard different things about them, but I haven't experienced any of those things. I've heard of them. Some people say that they almost appear like spirits. Some people have said, like, the whole porthole thing with them. I don't really know, because I haven't seen that myself. But as far as Sasquatch is concerned, I would agree with that. And with whatever Blondie was, I would definitely agree with that. And I do think she was a juvenile. She wasn't very big. So I think that this was a juvenile that I was dealing with back then that, you know, either viewed me as some kind of playmate or, you know, I don't know, thought I was cute, but of course, eventually I could have potentially become prey, but I don't know what the situation was with that either. I've had a lot of people make suggestions, but I just honestly don't know.
Well, even with Sasquatch stuff, it's different in the realm of the fact that you were talking about something like a dogman that also has skinwalker attached to it and werewolves. Where are you at with the fact that they could be either one of those things?
Well, I have a friend of mine who's Navajo, and he's told me some great stories, and he's actually really helped me make sense of a lot of my own experiences. He has insisted to me that dogman and skinwalkers are not the same thing. In the Navajo tradition, a skinwalker is supposed to be a male witch who, for lack of a better term, has turned to the dark side, and I guess it's taken an awful lot. Like there's no help for that individual to ever return to a life, you know, that's right and good. They pretty much just engulf the dark side, and there's some sort of dark sorcery that takes place where they can transform into something else. There is an investigator that I have been in touch with for a few years out in that area who investigated a case where there's an individual that shot at what he thought was a wolf, and the next morning he got a phone call from a family member. This was a Navajo, and they said that their uncle got shot. So of course, being worried, you know, he went to the hospital, and where the location of the shot was, it made this guy realize that his uncle was the skinwalker that he had shot. So from what I understand, that's something different. I kind of feel that Hollywood has made people, or made our culture, think that dogmen and skinwalkers are the same things, or werewolves and skinwalkers and dogmen are all the same things. As far as werewolves are concerned, I don't know. I've thought about that. I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. I've wondered about the possibility of things like quantum physics and how that's supposed to work, and how there are people that believe that you can change matter through the ideal of quantum physics and all of this other stuff. But I've also have been told by someone that I'm not in touch with anymore, but he shared a story, I guess, years ago on YouTube, and I'll have to see if I can contact this guy, but I have not seen him on any of the groups. But he swears up and down that he was a bounty hunter. He was in California and somehow got picked up by some biker gang, was taken to a house, put in a cell that was in a basement with some guy that he said was a junkie. And he said some woman came in and injected this man with something in front of him. And he said that this man transformed into a werewolf in front of him, and that he had to spend the night in the cell with this creature. And it had him cornered in the corner of the cell. And he said that he knew, he prayed all night, and he said that he felt like God told him, if you look this thing in the eyes, it's done. He'll kill you. And when morning came, the woman came back downstairs and opened the cell and let the creature out into the mountains somewhere. I guess it was somewhere up in the redwoods, I think. And this guy said that he was let go. Now I don't know if this happened. I don't know this man very well. The only thing that I think is interesting is in one of the groups that I was involved with from another podcast host that I had interviewed with, There's a woman on there that said that she was talking to a guy who I believe was from North Carolina, who told her he was a werewolf and that he had to take heroin in order to keep this creature in him under control. So I thought that was interesting because the guy that said that he was in the cell with a werewolf said that it looked like a junkie, like this guy was a junkie and had to take an injection in order for the transformation to happen. So I don't know. That's the only thing I've ever heard. I do think that if we have all of these legends from different cultures that at one point in time weren't even exposed to each other thousands of years ago, there has to be some sort of truth to it. What that truth is, I don't know. But I mean, you have werewolf legends from all over the place, unless they're confusing them with DogMan, which I think are possible.
Right, I think so. I think I have a Catholic friend that even showed me a saint that had canine attributes, which was a real shocker that the Catholic Church was recognizing werewolf saints.
Right. I think that's supposed to be Saint Christopher, if I'm not mistaken. Isn't that who it is?
I think it was Saint Alpo. Okay. No, I don't know the name.
Oh, well, yeah. Yeah, I've heard of that too. And for some reason, I thought it was.
Yeah, you might be right. Yeah, the computer goes a little bit slow when I'm on Zoom. Otherwise, I'd look it up here. Now, one of the common threads with people that are, perpetual experiencers like you that have this kinship with the others, they have other experiences too. Now, you described, well, first of all, I want to go back to the comment you made where I was, looking at my own sanity, that these things really happen. Now, you had verification with your father and the family dog, right? I mean, is this something that was verified? Do they cop to what was going on?
My father, I haven't talked to them a whole lot about this, but my father he's elderly and his memory's going, but he does, every time I see him or we have a long conversation, he will tell me about how he remembers that I used to go into those woods behind the house and how it really disturbed him and it really bothered him. And so I ended up having some serious kidney problems as a toddler, and I was in and out of the hospital for like months until they figured out what that was. And that, of course, is traumatizing enough to a parent to have to deal with a sick child. But he would tell me, he would often say, you going into those woods scared me more than when you were really sick and we didn't know what was going on. So that's all that he's said about that. I haven't sat down and talked fully to my family about everything that's happened. Where my mother lives in Vermont, she lives basically on top of a small mountain. There was activity there, and my stepfather and I had an experience after I came back from active duty in the military, but my stepfather is aware that there's something on his property, and he just refers to them as the neighbors. So he has told me, he said, I don't know what they are, but whatever they are, they're tall and they're covered in hair, and we see each other every once in a while. But normally if I see one and they're watching me for a little too long, I kind of take that as the hint of I need to leave, and he'll leave the area that he's in and just go do something else. My mother, as far as I know, has not experienced anything. I think she's very skeptical and she refuses to believe anything is up there, which is kind of ironic because I ended up having an experience with my parents in Vermont too. But she thinks that he's seeing ghosts. So she believes in ghosts, but she doesn't believe in these things. And my stepfather will talk about it a little bit, but he's very secretive about it. I think he's very protective about what's going on up there. So even with family members, he won't get too deeply into it, because I think partially for our safety and partially because I think he feels obligated to protect whatever it is that's living up there.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. My other question to you here before I bump myself off was the roots of your own experiences here before your DogMan experiences. Was there any sign at all that this was connected to an ET experience? Were you, experiencing lights, missing time, things of that
I've only
nature?
had one experience like that, and I've had people ask me this, which I think is interesting. So I've only had one personal experience that I really can't explain concerning this, but I was 12. I think it was 12 going on 13, but it was still in Bennington. And again, remember, I told you it's a couple of towns. So it's Bennington, Shaftesbury, and I believe Dorset. They make a triangle in an area called the Glastonbury Wilderness, which is right outside town, where, like I said, a lot of people have had all kinds of strange stuff happen to them, but UFOs is one of those things. But when this happened to me, it was New Year's Eve, and I think it was I want to say it was 1986, I think, or it was 1985. Oh, I think we were going into 86 at that point because I was 12 years old, and my parents had split up, and my mom and I moved to an apartment downtown on Main Street, and it was this old mansion, and she asked me to go to the only convenience store that was open, which was like a block away, to go get like some milk and stuff because we knew everything was going to be closed the next day. So I walked out of the house and I looked up and there was this thing, and I think I thought it was a kite at first, but it was crescent shaped. There were 4 lights on it. There were 2 red ones and 2 white ones. And I just kind of stared up at it. And I think it was just kind of like, oh, okay. Only because, like I said, I've had strange experiences, and I was just wasn't sure what I was looking at. And I think I thought somebody was probably playing a joke on me. Because again, a small town, everybody knew where everybody lived, that kind of stuff. So I just started walking. And when I walked, this thing was following me. There was no noise except almost like the rush of wind moving over it. But there was no sound coming out of this thing. And I started to walk, and I kind of had to walk sort of down an alleyway that was between where we lived and the local rec center, and the athletic fields were right behind it, to get to the other neighborhood where this corner store was right on the corner. And I think I remember I started to get really nervous because this thing kept following me and I didn't know what it was. And the only other thing that I remember was that I was standing on the other side of the street, like I had made it to the convenience store. I was standing outside the convenience store, and I was looking at what I guess was a UFO. And I'm only using that term because I don't know what it was, but it was sort of hovering close to the ground. And yeah, it had the typical, silver disc shape, and it had something on top that I guess may have been like a window or whatever. And I remember I just had this feeling of dread come over me, and I was in a cold sweat, and I walked into the store, and I was trying to hide from it in the store because it was across the street. And I think I just remember having like the feelings of shock, and I was wandering around the store, and I remember the lady at the counter was like, "Hey kid, if you're going to throw up, you need to go outside." Cause I guess I looked that bad. So,
Wow.
I just kind of looked at her and shook my head, like, don't say anything. Cause I have no idea what the hell's going on. This thing's outside. So I finally remembered, because it took me a while to remember why I was, like, what I was there for. Like, I totally forgot what my mom asked me to get. So I finally grabbed a couple of things and then looked outside the window, and it was gone. So I was relieved, and I was like, okay, well, I guess I can go home now. And so I paid for the stuff she sent me to get, like milk, bread, that kind of stuff. I think I ran all the way home because I was scared I'd run into it again. And when I got in the house, my mother started screaming at me, and she was like, "Where have you been?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And she was like, "You've been gone for 2 hours." And I was like, "Are you serious?" And she was like, "Yeah, I sent you out. I think she sent me out at like 5:30. It's the Northeast. It gets dark really quick. in the wintertime.
Mm-hmm.
So it was already dark. And she's like, I sent you out. And she's like, it's 7:30. She's like, where have you been? And I couldn't answer her, but I think I was still looking pretty pale. And she was like, okay, well, you look like you don't feel well. And I was like, I don't. And she's like, okay, well, go lay down, and that was it. That was my only experience, other than seeing occasionally some strange lights in the sky here or there. But I mean, that was it. That was my one and only experience with anything. Even with losing time, I've never lost time in the woods. I've never lost time with cryptids at all. I've felt a little bit disorientated. I'm pretty sure I've been zapped. If you're familiar with that term, I'm pretty sure that that's happened a couple times, but nothing like that. And that was, like I said, that was New Year's Eve when that happened.
It's fascinating that you're not more freaked out and reluctant to talk about this. What do you think that
I've
is?
been talking about this for a long time. And that's part of the reason why I do it under an alias, because then I have the freedom to walk away and go about my life. I do that intentionally. I've talked about this I have some close friends in the community where we've talked about our experiences. I have a very dear friend, actually, that's this guy that I'm dating. He's had several experiences and he has toyed with the idea of coming out, but he's in the corporate world, which is part of the reason why he doesn't want to go public with anything. But he's had some really strange experiences, and we've helped each other out quite a bit to try to make sense of them. But at the same time, you can drive yourself crazy trying to make sense of these things. I don't know why. There are times when I absolutely don't want to talk about this. I've been with people in the community where we've had meetups and we've hung out, we've talked, and then all of a sudden I'll just have this feeling come over me where I'm just like, I don't want to talk about this. And it's either because it'll make me uncomfortable or because I've talked about it so much that I just don't want to talk about it. But
well, let's hold that thought right there. Is it ever occurred to you, and I've heard this before from other people, is that they don't want you to talk about them? Is that a part of the mix at all?
When you say them, okay, see, there's a couple of things that come to my mind. So when you say them, what do you mean specifically by that?
Well, regarding your experiences in particular with DogMan, do you ever get the feeling that there's a permission slip to talk about them at certain times with certain people?
I don't know. I've heard that before. And I will honestly say that, again, this is part of the reason why I do things under an alias. There are some people that I would absolutely never talk to about this. There are some people that have said things to me in my daily life that have hinted at them experiencing some really weird things, and I won't share. And part of it is if it's in a work environment. When I'm at work, I'm at work. I feel like I need to deal with being at work and being as professional as possible. So there's some aspects of my life I'm not going to share because I'm at work. With other people, it really just depends on what they say and what they're dealing with. Like I know people who think that they are abductees because they have pieces of things that they can remember and other things that they cannot remember, and that have said that statement where they feel like they're not allowed to say what they saw, almost like their brain has somehow been scrambled, and so they only have bits and pieces. I've heard this in connection with, again, with Sasquatch at least. As far as DogMan's concerned, I don't really know, but I do know, like I said, I told you about the last time that I saw them. Any other time that I've seen one, and it's only been a handful of times.
Only. That's still quite a bit. Yeah.
A handful of times, like, okay, like the reason why this researcher and I ended up at that park north of Nashville is because it was behind my ex-mother-in-law's house. She's got a lot of land. And my kids were seeing things on that property, and I had one experience where I flat out saw something. Every other time I heard howling, and I'm talking about low and large howling. I'd find footprints in their woods, sometimes with my ex-husband, sometimes with our kids. But my kids have seen a lot of things there. They've seen things at the wood line, watching them that they've described as both being Sasquatch and DogMan, because they've been there more than I have. My ex and I split up like 3 years ago. So even now when they go over to grandma's house, they don't really like to be around the woods because they feel like they're being watched. The only other time I got a really good look at one was about 5 years ago now, leaving my ex-mother-in-law's house, and their wood line was about 100 yards from their door, but there was something very large standing there. And at first I couldn't see very well because they blend very well with the forest. They blend in with the trees, but it came out enough where I could see the canine head and the ears and the nose. And I stopped and looked at it, and it noticed that I was looking at him, her, I don't know. But I had this feeling come over me, like, I know you see me, you need to leave. Not like it was gonna hurt me, but just like a very stern warning of, okay, you see now go. Nothing to see here. It was almost like, I think it would almost be like, encountering a police officer doing his job.
Right. I'm undercover.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Weird sensation that I got.
Right.
But when I was driving away, I was like, okay, I know. By that time I had done a few interviews, and I was talking to people in the community, and I was making connections and really kind of understanding what I had experienced, even though I'd accepted the fact that they were real. And even I had the same sensation the night that we saw the two that were in front of the car. This is not something that I think that you can ever get used to, ever. I don't think there's anything else on earth that I've ever seen where it's like this thing can close the gap and kill me in a few seconds. But really knowing that, like I've felt with them. So this is not something I would want to go out and play with. It's not something I'd want to piss off in any way. And so even that night when there was one charging up the hill at us, I was more than ready to get out of there. And I really do feel like there was mind speak with that too. I felt like something was asking me, why are you guys here? You need to go. And it finally got to the point where I couldn't stand it anymore. And I was just lucky enough that when I looked at my partner who I was with, and he asked me, do you want to go? It was just a definite yes, we need to go. So I don't know. That's not something that I think anybody should ever really take for granted. I've heard people talk about how they want to see these things, and I always say, no, you don't, because we are so conditioned to believe that monsters don't exist. We're so conditioned to believe that anything that Hollywood presents to us is a myth. It's a fairy tale. It's all made up. And when you're conditioned to believe that the world is a certain way and that it operates a certain way, and then you see something that's not supposed to be here, that's not something that you can easily get over at all. I mean, I really do think that I at least have symptoms of PTSD, especially from that early childhood experience. I get very jumpy and irritable and feel very threatened if anybody's hands are coming anywhere near my face. And I feel like that's a response to what I experienced with her. I don't like to be grabbed at all by anybody. I cringe. Even if somebody's like excited to see me and they hug me and it's somebody I haven't seen in 10 years, I instantly cringe when somebody grabs me. So, I mean, there are things that stay with you. When I first talked about this, I had nightmares for 3 months. When I first talked with this, to Vic Cundiff about this, I had nightmares every night for 3 months. Because I finally got it out. I finally accepted that it happened, that I didn't imagine these things. And that was hard to deal with. I was a mess. And I ended up telling my ex-husband finally the story. And he told me that he thought that I was lucky that I had seen something that was supposed to be a mythological creature. And I didn't feel lucky. I felt cursed. Honestly, I felt like there was something really wrong with me. And there were other times when I felt like that too. But as far as like not really freaking out about it, I've talked about this a lot, to the point where it's like I accept that it's my reality. It's not a reality I'm happy about, but for whatever reason, I guess I'm just kind of wired differently. And I think there are other people that are like that. There are some people that experience things I've never experienced. People see ghosts. I don't. I've had some strange things happen that I guess could be called that, but there's people who have experienced some pretty amazing things. But I really feel like as humans, we kind of all have a certain response to it that's very similar, if not the same.
Well, would you go back? If you could change it, would you want to unlearn these mysteries?
Yeah. Yes. Honestly, yes.
Right.
Yeah, no, I kind of feel like in some ways I was happier when I didn't know, when I was kind of ignorant to it. I mean, even though I knew there were things going on, I knew that there were things that were different, but I've had so many more like class B's experiences, I guess, like you could say. Like I've walked in the woods and I've smelled things, I've heard things. Getting back to like my stepfather's property, I was there for a year before I joined the military. And once I made the decision to enlist, I was trying to get in shape for basic training. And I used to jog the perimeter of the hill that they lived on. And there's this one particular area, and I still don't know what it is. It could have been deer, for all I know, because I try to put things in a box, especially dealing with this. When I talk to people that are having their own experiences, I try to put it in a box. I've tried to put my own in a box first. And if I can't, then it's obviously something, other. But when I used to jog in this area almost on a daily basis, it was a very dark trail in the middle of the woods. And I would hear voices. I would hear people talking. I could see shadows moving. And I could hear things moving through the trees, and I could hear things moving through the leaf litter. And sometimes I would stop, right? Because I was trying to like peer into the woods to see what was going on. And there were a few times I felt breath on the back of my neck, and I whirl around and there wouldn't be anybody there. I mean, just really strange stuff. And I wasn't the only one that experienced those things on that path. My sister did at times. My mother never hiked down that area because she didn't like it. But it was almost a daily occurrence. When I would run through, this would happen. And sometimes I would be too busy to stop. I'd have to just keep going because I had other things to do that day. But other times I would stop. And when I would stop, there were voices like whispering to each other. I mean, I have no idea what that was. But it was really strange. And again, this is an area in Vermont where there's activity. And, my stepdad refers to them as the neighbors. And when I had the sighting that I had with him, he harvests his own timber for the winter. I mean, they have just a wood stove. He built this house, has a wood stove for heat, right? So they have to get about 12 cords of wood every year. So I came back from active duty, and I stayed with him for a few months. And I was in the woods helping him get like a cord of wood that he left down there. And he was running the chainsaw, and I've got these big logs, and I'm holding them steady for him. And then all of a sudden he something catches his eye at the wood line, and he turns off his chainsaw and he waves. And so I'm thinking it's one of his neighbors, and he did have a few human neighbors that were kind of scattered around the area. So I was thinking it was one of them. And I looked at the wood line, and the only thing that I saw was from the shoulder down, this kind of orange colored, you know, arm, torso, and leg step back into the trees. And I looked at my, looked at my stepdad, and he just looked at me, and he kind of like had a really nervous smile on his face. And I don't remember if I said, "Who is that?" or "What is that?" But he just kind of shrugged, and he said, "It's one of the neighbors." And then we started to hear what sounded like voices in the woods and whoops, you know, and wood knocks and everything. There's a lot of wood knocks up there. And then he got nervous, and he was like, "Okay, we got to go." And he started to quickly load the truck up. And the more noise we heard, the more he was like, "You got to hurry. Let's get this thing loaded and get out of here." And so I was like, "Okay." And we drove back to the house, and I think he said to me, "Don't tell your mom." And we didn't talk about it after that. It was years later when he actually sat down and talked about the neighbors. And it was so funny to me because there were so many things that happened over the years between visits and when I lived there, where he would say the neighbors did it, or it must have been the neighbors, like things like trees, you know, laid over in paths that we had been on like 30 minutes ago. And we came back around, and if anybody was running ATVs in the forest, my stepdad would find like these saplings over certain trails. And I remember one day having to help him lift them up, and they weren't there, you know, earlier when we were in the woods. And I remember asking him about that. He said, "Yeah, it was probably just the neighbors doing it." And I was like, "Oh, what neighbors?" You know, because there was one family that lived on one side of the hill and another one that lived down the road across the street. And he was like, "Yeah, you don't know them." And he would just move things out of the way. That was just his way of dismissing it. You know?
I love this guy. I mean, this is an amazing guy. I can tell there's this real kinship with you and him too. And I really appreciate his attitude towards this. It's really interesting.
Yeah, that's just, you know, that's just kind of how he is. The only other really crazy story I can tell you from Vermont, and my sister and I do bring this up to each other. We'll ask each other if we remember this, but you know, I think that she's had her own experiences, but she's real reluctant to talk about some of the things that she's experienced. And you want to talk about somebody being fearful. My sister has been afraid of werewolves ever since we were little. And I used to try to ask her why, and she would never really tell me why. So I think she's had her own things happen that she may have blocked out or never talked about. But we had this experience together, and it was right when, this was 95. It was right when I was getting ready to leave for basic training. And we were standing at the very top of the hill. There's two houses on this property. There's the main house that my stepdad built in the 80s. Then he started to build a smaller one that literally a tractor trailer came up that mountain, and they got this house on the tractor trailer and they moved it further down so that it was easier for him and my mom. My mom's in her late 70s and he's about to turn 90. So they wanted to, he wanted a place that was a lot easier for him to access and get out if he needed to, right? So we were outside on the top of the hill, I think just hanging out, talking, and all of a sudden we heard a gunshot. And after this gunshot, we heard what I can only describe as a roar. And I've never heard anything like this. The only way I can really describe it is it sounded like a lion crossed with a T-Rex from Jurassic Park. But whatever it was, it roared and it bounced off the trees, and then a few seconds passed and we heard the same roar further away. And a few more seconds passed and we heard the roar again, even further away. So whatever it was running away from the gunshots in another direction, away from us and away from whoever the shooter was. So it was so loud that my brother-in-law came out of the house and he asked us, you know, what was going on, and we didn't know. And we were trying to make sense of what we heard, but it really freaked us out. And of course, we're trying to put logical animals into a box of what that could have possibly have been. And when we were talking about it, my stepdad came home. We told him what happened. And as we were telling him the story, like he's a very kind of happy-go-lucky guy. And so as we were telling him the story, his face just kind of dropped more and more as he was listening to. My sister was the one that told him what happened. And so he very quietly said, okay, just go in the house and stay there. I'm going to go see what happened. But he did make a quick phone call to my stepbrother who lived in the same town. He actually lives up there now. He inherited the original house, but he made a call to my stepbrother and he waited for him to come pick him up. And my stepbrother showed up in his truck. They got in the truck and they took off into the woods. And I think my mom came home and we told her what was going on. And at one point we kept going outside to kind of see if we could hear anything, if we knew what was, could figure out what was going on and stuff. And then we saw my stepdad walking up the hill out of the woods with a shotgun that he didn't have before, or at least not that we noticed. So he came walking out of the woods with a shotgun, and then right behind him came my stepbrother in his truck, and he left. And my sister was all over him, and he was, she was like, okay, what was it? What did you see? And all this other stuff. And he kind of looked at her and he said, I don't want to talk about it. And I don't want you to talk about it. I just need you guys to forget what you heard. And we tried to get more out of him, and he was stern with us, and he was like, no, we're not going to talk about this. And then he went in the house and he went and put that gun away. And that was kind of that on that. But my sister and I have, over the years, we don't see each other much, but we have asked each other, do you remember when that happened? And we pretty much just kind of nod and say, yeah, that was pretty weird. And I wonder what that was.
Wow. Amazing stories here. My guest today again is Lisa Lycan. Lisa, do you have anything coming up as far as, are you working on telling your story in book form, or what's coming up for you as far as getting this information out here? Because it is important to share these experiences because you're not alone.
Right. I've thought about doing that. I do have some other projects that I'm working on that don't involve this phenomenon, but I have thought about it. I've had that brought up to me a few times that I should probably write them down. I have my own Facebook group, and I set that up to be kind of like a co-op for other researchers, but also for eyewitnesses.
Sure. And what's the name of that?
It's so it's an acronym for the name Lisa, but it's Lycan International Sasquatch Association. And we kind of have a screening process with letting people in. And the reason why is because I'm sure if you've been in this field for a while, so I'm sure that you've noticed that unfortunately some of the groups pertaining to this stuff, there can be some drama, there can be trolls, there can be just some nonsense that goes on. So we really try to screen the people that we let in. But anybody is welcome to join. I can be found on Facebook, if anybody wants to contact me concerning any encounters or things that they have going on. As far as any projects, I don't know. I've been planning a trip with some researchers here for a while to go to the Land Between the Lakes. I don't know if you're familiar with any of the stories from there.
Oh yeah.
If not, the family that was murdered. Yeah, a friend of mine knows the exact location and wants to bring me. So I'm hoping that we will do that this summer. We've been talking about it for a while. He's had, there's been some health issues with his family, and I've just had some things going on, but we've been planning that for a while. So hopefully that, but also I am planning on relocating out west here in about another year. and with my boyfriend who also has had experiences, but we've talked about wanting to research together. There's all kinds of stuff out there in that region of the United States, but we also want to go and explore the Bennington Triangle itself a little bit, just because there's been so much to that. It was mentioned in David Paulides' book, 411, the Western edition, not Western, sorry, Eastern edition. There was a very famous case that happened in the 1940s with a Bennington College student who disappeared in the Glastonbury wilderness, and she wasn't the only one. Over the course of a decade, about 13 people disappeared. So we're interested in exploring that because so much of what I experienced came from that region. So that's something that I'm planning on doing. But past that, I don't have any really big plans. And probably sooner or later, I'll try to write down all my experiences. I'd really like to compare other people's DogMan experiences and see what's concrete with these creatures as far as behavior and physical attributes, just to kind of have it written down. I don't know if anybody's doing that, but I think that would be a great way to have the information kind of compiled so that almost like a field guide for people
Right.
to know what they're dealing with in the area.
Perfect. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show, Lisa. Can you hold after the line here before you get off here? I just want to chat with you for a second. My guest again is Lisa Lycan. An amazing encounter. Thank you so much, Lisa. All right. So was that our last talk? My last talk? The last we'll hear of Lisa Lycan? No. In fact, I reached out to the new sponsors over at Metallic Monsters to see if we could take this story one step further. Now, we've seen what we can do on paper with the non-disputed talent of Alex Whitcomb, but what if we could go one step farther and actually draw out this creature in a 3D form? Well, 3D printing, right, is a way that almost anybody can access via a 3D artist how to do that. And so we rounded one up and hopped online with Lisa to see if we could do this together and come close to the description of what Blondie looked like in description. And I'm not going to spoil anything, but the full video will be up on season 2, episode 5. And the results, well, they speak for themselves. An amazing, I could say amazing so much, but I feel like this is an amazing time for us to do this. So that's coming up here, season 2, episode 5. Hey, if you want to be on the show, you can do that. Shoot me a message over at strangebrowradio@gmail.com. Don't forget our big event coming up here May 1st and 2nd on Power Spots and Forgotten Cultures. Go over to strangebrowradio.com. The link will be available on page 1, or go over to the Facebook page at Strange Brow Radio under the events tab, and all the links there to interact with the speakers coming up this week, May 1st and May 2nd. All right. Thanks for listening. And of course, I will see you in the trees.